Joining us live, virtually online. Hope you can hear me, inshallah, and everything's okay. Okay. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I want to introduce, of course, today's session, Developing Character and Resilience in Children. We are here at Masjid DrHooman, graciously hosting this event in collaboration with Khalil Center. Of course, today we have two guests speaking. We have Dr. Kashmala and Dr. Hooman, who will cover this topic, inshallah. And just so that you're aware a little bit of the conversation that we'll be covering today. The session itself, parenting, of course, comes with its unique challenges and rewards. In this interactive workshop, we'll cover clinical and research-based concepts drawing from both the field of psychology and our own Islamic tradition to understand and embody the 5 virtues of character development for Muslim children. We will also outline common sources of conflict in the parent-child relationship, understanding your child's personality and the cognitive and emotional ways of changing behavior, role modeling, experiential learning, play-based learning, and using pro-social behaviors will also be discussed using the prophetic tradition and methods of teaching. So with that short introduction, I would like to welcome both Dr. Kashmala and Dr. Hooman to the stage. Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you all for coming today, inshallah. I'm not sure how many people are watching us online, but hello to those people as well. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, guys, so inshallah, what we're going to talk about today, we have quite a few things. If I can get the next slide, please. So we have a quick outline. It's not a quick outline. It's actually quite a few things. But just to keep us all on track of the different topics that we will be covering, inshallah. So we'll have a quick icebreaker just to get you guys to talk as well, so we're not just talking. And then we'll get right into the importance of character development on the different types of functioning, including, first of all, cognitive functioning. So our intelligence, the brain, basically knowledge. And then we'll get right into 5 central virtues of character development. And this model is based off of something that Khalil Center has developed, is developing right now as well. And then we'll get into something called personality development and personality traits. A lot of people ask questions about, how do I know how my kid's personality is? It never matches with my personality. So we'll talk about that as well. And then the last sort of part of the presentation, we're going to talk about the role of different parts of this model. So the role of teaching in character development, the role of creating good habits, the role of experiential learning, so that's more around emotion, the role of social modeling and imitation. And then finally, we'll talk about attachment, and then hopefully after Maghrib Salah, we'll have some time for a Q&A. So does that sound good to everyone? That's a lot of stuff. It may sound theoretical, but we'll try to make it as practical as possible, inshallah. Okay, so with the person next to you, or if you can come close to someone and just get friendly with them, what are the top 3 challenges that you are currently facing as a parent? And you might be thinking, I have like 100 challenges, I could just like go on forever. pick the top 3. So top 3 challenges that you are facing as a parent. And then as a follow-up question with the person next to you, what types of conflicts are you engaging in with your child currently? As long as it's not like too personal, just like a general conflict, you can talk about that as well. So we'll give you maybe like a minute to just share, and then you can share with us as well. Okay, you can start talking. Okay, 10 more seconds, inshallah, and then we will come back. Okay, so great discussion. I'm sorry to interrupt everyone. Great discussion. I'm hearing a lot of good things. Okay, so one sister on the sister's side and somebody from the brother's side. So sisters, you guys go first. Can you tell me one of the challenges that you talk about that you're currently? Yes, go ahead. Okay, great. That's a big one. That it's difficult to get your children to talk to you and share your feelings with you. Okay, excellent. And somebody from the brother's side, one challenge that you guys shared.
Yeah, the oldest one is really locked up,
Okay.
and she's not very expressive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the younger ones just keep relating and keep picking up the bad habits. I think that's a good one.
All right. Yes. Okay. Interesting. The similar things I would say between the brothers and sisters here. So the oldest child, the brother is mentioning, kind of locked up and not really expressing themselves. The younger children are picking up on that sort of behavior. Okay. So I have no solution for either of those yet, but we will get to that. We will, inshallah, talk about it. So what is a conflict? We just talked about conflicts here. So just in the next slide, it's essentially a serious disagreement or argument. It could be due to a difference of opinion. And the reason why conflicts occur, of course, is because we are human beings. It's part of our natural way of communicating. And a positive form of conflict could be that we can understand each other. So if we all just said like yes, and we were all polite all the time, we might not ever grow. So sometimes if the conflict is healthy, no one is swearing at each other, there's no violence, nothing like that, we could actually come out of a conflict as better people and with more perspective. In the next slide, we have like a whole host of things that I've personally noticed when I did a little bit of therapy in a past life, of just common things in the Muslim community. So I primarily dealt with Muslim clients, and as you can see, the list is not exhaustive, but these were the most common things. So if I had to pick between these, I would say school and bullying tended to come up a lot. Identity, especially like the Muslim identity, religion, not practicing enough. My parents are too practicing, they're extreme. Interaction with the opposite gender, and especially now gender identity, sexuality, getting a lot of cases about that as well, homosexuality as well. Mental illness, undiagnosed mental illness within a family, drugs, alcohol, social media is like forever, that's like a common problem, and external factors. And something interesting about external factors, many times when people do for counseling or therapy, the first sort of default is like, my son is possessed, or my mother-in-law did like magic on my daughter, and so that tends to be like very least, like that's like the least common sort of reason. Many times it's more to do with personality, behavior, the things that we'll be talking about today. Of course, as Muslims, we do believe in those factors as well, but we're not going to touch upon that today. Okay, so I'm going to skip the next slide and go on to topic 1, looking at social emotional decline and screen time.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وحده والصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ربنا زدنا علما وعملا. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. To all of you joining us in person and as well as those that are joining us online live. So why is this important, right? I think what we really want to highlight is some of the need. The need that we're finding is that children over time, at least in our day and age especially, are becoming less and less developed socially. What I mean by that is that they don't have the appropriate social skills to be able to develop and to form meaningful relationships with people or how to conduct themselves in social settings. What does that have to do with? Well, the very obvious one is all the screen time, right? Every child as young as, babies now are going up to glass and flipping, right? And trying to turn off or turn on any piece of glass, a window for that matter, right? So they've become so socialized so early, and this is something that is at an unprecedented in terms of the speed in which the transfer of information and connection, these devices in the world, like this information overload is happening. And what we have associated with this is data also showing is that the increased social media usage also increases a whole host of other mental health problems. One of the ones that I really want to focus on is regardless of category of mental illness, what we're finding as a whole is that whether it's clinically significant or not, we're finding that individuals and children are having problems of socialization, right? And in Muslim communities, and Muslim cultures are generally very high context cultures. Recently, Western countries tend to be very low context cultures. What does that mean? High context cultures means that, when you walk into a masjid, you know that you have to take off your shoes. You know that you don't go and, start running up on the mimbar, for example, right? As a, 10-year-old or something like that. You know that when you walk into a room as an adolescent, you greet certain individuals before you go off and play. You ask permission for certain things, or that when you are gauging the body language of people around you, say your father or your mother or the room, you know how to conduct yourself or to redirect yourself. Children nowadays, because of the fact that they are becoming so fixated on social devices generally, combined with the overemphasis on academics, right? We're finding that individuals, these children are having a whole host of socialization problems, right? And they don't know how to cut themselves. And this is very problematic. That grow up this way, they end up having a whole lot of problems in life. For example, marriage, right? When they grow up, they don't know how to socialize or read the cues and the emotions and the nuances of the communication with their spouse. They don't know how to show empathy. They become impulsive because they want something immediately, needs-based, that they want what they want and they want it now, right? And all of these things become problems when they're in the workforce. If you cannot conduct yourself in a way to be able to gauge the needs of the employment setting, what your employer wants or what others need, then you're going to have a lot of problems, right? And so we have a whole host of relational breakdown, and we're social creatures by our very design. And the odd thing is that we're actually on this project of desocializing human beings, right? These children. So one thing I'll mention, which is this, we'll go to the next slide, is that a lot of research. So what do we need to do? Because a lot of parents, rightfully so, place a lot of emphasis on children's academic development. As minorities in Western countries, often, talk about plight of Muslims in being economically disadvantaged as a result, politically underrepresented, advocacy is a problem, and so we're always kind of under the microscope or under the target, and therefore we have this wish or desire to really make it in the society and to be able to gain economic and socio-political power in order to be able to advance our communities, to be able to grow our communities, right? And a part of that is to make your children very successful. Take care of your family, take care of, we want them to be happy. But what we're finding, what's interesting, is that the more you emphasize social development, in fact, the more you work on socialization and character development in children, the more successful they will be academically. Working on character development in children is a better predictor of academic success than actually working on skills, study skills or academics or intelligence building, right? And I mean, some of this is just intuitive, meaning that if a child knows how to, manage their impulses, they're more likely to push themselves to study harder and longer. If a child has a sense of responsibility, if a child has a sense of being able to rein in their impulse to be able to take care of somebody else or to do something for somebody else, they're more likely to be able to not quit when they're in a difficult situation in school. And finally, I mean, our motivation is in the Prophet ﷺ, right? I mean, a lot of this is going to be situated within the prophetic context as we get more and more specific, from the general to the specific. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمِ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that I have been sent only to perfect good character. Okay? And Allah Ta'ala is asking us, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسِكُمْ وَأَهْلِكُمْ نَارًا. Save your children and yourselves, or save yourselves first and your children from the fire, and your families rather, from the fire of Jahannam. And there's a very important emphasis continuously being laid on character and character development. And we see this with the children around the Prophet ﷺ being taught character. And we're going to kind of unravel this as we go along, inshallah. So we want to switch slides. Go ahead.
Jazakallah, Dr. Hooman. Moving on with just some of the more research findings, Dr. Hooman mentioned a few of the studies on pro-social behavior. Just a few more things over here to get all of our brains working. If you're into research, if you're a little bit nerdy like I am, I do like linking things back to research. So we see over here that changes in academic achievement in grade 8, so as early as the age of 13, can be better predicted from knowing child's social competence. So if they're able to make eye contact, if they're able to pick up on nuances, as Dr. Hooman mentioned, in a public setting. And just a quick sort of anecdotal example, I teach at York University and I'm still a student myself. So sometimes the undergraduates will come into our office, this is prior to COVID, and there's this one girl, her hands and legs were shaking and she was not able to even make eye contact with me. So I asked her, like, is everything okay? Like, am I making you uncomfortable? Like, the door was open, everything was fine. And she said, I just have a lot of social anxiety. And this was not the only student that term. That term, at least 5 other students came in and said, I have social anxiety. And I'm thinking, does everyone have social anxiety now? Especially post-COVID, they were not able to make eye contact even with me. And I'm not even like a professor or a doctor or anything. So that's something that I think comes in relation to social competence. And they were straight A students, they were doing really well in the class, but they couldn't make eye contact. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about social competence. Just one practical example of that. If you can go to the next slide as well.
Yeah, so our goal here then is to really talk about character and character development. And discussions of character originating in the hadith literature itself and then moving on has been a long-standing tradition within the Islamic tradition. So we have philosophers that talk about it, right? They draw from even Aristotelian ideas, the Ancient Greeks talked about character. Most of humanity talked about character. And so Islamic scholars, what they did was they actually drew some of the works of the ancient Greeks and drawing from the philosophical literature, having a project to translate all of this into Arabic, which was completed. And then what they did was they evaluated what we would consider like the Western science of the time, right? And then they evaluated that science in light of the Quran and Sunnah, in light of the Islamic tradition. And you find this common thread across philosophers to Sufis to theologians to various different Islamic scholars, even physicians, talking about character and character development. And a common denominator across all of them is this very common definition. So they actually define good character or the development of character. And they say, what is character? This definition is like, like the golden definition that you'll find one of the few things that all these scholars, completely agree upon, despite being from different subfields, is to engage in pro-social behavior with exertion, right? Meaning that it's habituated. In the beginning, right, a child, if you leave them alone, what do they want to do? They just want to run around. They want to play. They want to wrestle. They don't want to, they want to, do whatever they feel like it. In order to ingrain good character in them, what you need to do is to habituate that behavior. So it's with a lot of force in the beginning, exertion of unnatural behaviors, until what happens, it becomes trained into the nafs, we say, right, this nafs, such that it becomes automated, meaning that we believe that the nafs is not evil, right? وَنَفْسًا وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. It has a capacity for evil and propensity for evil, also has a propensity for good. It's based upon how you train it and how you discipline it. So once you discipline the nafs, it starts to do these automated behaviors. You can do this for yourself as well. You can think about all of the things that you do automatically without necessarily thinking. The foods that you eat, your habits that you engage in when you go home, your sleep habits, your study habits, your relational habits, all of these things, you often do these things without thinking about them. In the beginning, you may teach a child to pray. They don't want to pray in the beginning, or they keep forgetting. You continuously train it into them until they reach a point where they just pray and they feel odd if they don't. Think about brushing your teeth. That's a very simple, rudimentary example. Many people, hopefully, when you go to bed at night or in the morning, you wake up, you feel really like strange if you don't brush your teeth, right? I mean, my children are kind of like this too. They're fighting. I'm like, okay, just wait. They're like, no, I need to brush my teeth now, right? Because there's this sort of weird, sort of disgusting feeling in your mouth that you have. Until you've rinsed out and you cleaned out your mouth, you don't feel comfortable. I mean, children, initially, they resist this, right? For all of you who have children, you have to kind of like, it's really exhausting getting them to have to brush their teeth all the time. Did you brush your teeth? No, I didn't. Or can I just not do it today? How about tomorrow? Okay, I'm really tired today. And you just got to force the habit until they do it on their own. So this is sort of habituation that we're going to talk about, inshallah. And the idea is that the more we habituate these types of behaviors, and we're going to talk more about even thinking, right? Habits of thought, as well as habits of action, that will then become internalized in the individual. And the goal is, if you've done this right, the child, when they reach adulthood or their adolescence and beyond adolescence, they're just going to kind of do that which feels natural and automated and habitual to them, right? Okay, yeah. So if we can go on to the next slide. And then, we're going to talk about character virtues in the drawing from the Islamic tradition. Let's go to the next one. So there are basically four central virtues that the Islamic tradition and scholarship has basically talked about. Four of them, and they're tied to the conception of the human being, by the way. Their belief about how human beings are, their nature. Okay, so for example, they believe that human beings have an aql, they have an intellect, reason, okay? And because human beings have reason, they're unlike animals. what they need to do is to utilize that reason, and they need to moderate and utilize that aql in order to achieve its perfection, which would be called hikmah. Okay? And so hikmah is being able to to utilize your aql and wisdom to rein in your impulses, but also to engage in intellectual exercises. Okay? Things of reason, things of intellect, things of knowledge and academics and education. The other is temperance, which is essentially tied to your drive of shahwa, appetite of drives, right? Everybody, and this isn't bad, by the way, it just needs to be tempered. Too much or too little is problematic. So for example, if you have a desire to eat biryani, right? That's great. I mean, you can like the drive to want to eat is a motivation that you need to engage in, because it also gives you motivation not only to eat, but also to have passions for things, interests in things, right? To get married, for example. But if it becomes excessive, is problematic, right? Because then it becomes unrestrained, hedonistic type of behavior, engaging and indulging a lot of biryani and like, you know, baklava and kunafa and whatever you're going to be eating. It's going to be problematic for you. But then the absence of it is also like you don't have any appetite to eat, or you don't have any desire to do anything. You're sort of one of those people that are just unmotivated in life, and you have no passions or interests in life. Just go with whatever is happening. That's temperance, okay? And there's a bunch of sub-virtues that actually relate to these chief virtues. They're all related. These central virtues are related to the conception of human nature. The third one is what we call the aggressive or survival instinct, meaning that we all have an instinct to stand up for justice. When we see something wrong, or we are being wronged, or family is being wronged, to get angry. When you see something bad or wrong happening, you go into a protective mode. That's good for you, right? So we want to have assertiveness in the interest of upholding justice and personal and familial safety. But too much of it is aggression, and it ends up not being healthy for you, because, like for example, if you're upset that your, I don't know, spouse didn't take care of a particular important task at home related to the children, you come home and you just start yelling, right? The likelihood of them listening to you and having a conversation and responding is very low now, right? But we want assertiveness to say, look, we don't just let this pass by, because this could have been a threatening, problematic situation, so we need to take this seriously, but we also don't want to be aggressive about it, or on the converse, like not saying anything at all, be taken advantage of all the time. People run you over all the time and you're fine with it. And then finally, we separated out this fourth one. Spirituality actually was embedded within the others, but we separated it out because, you know, just for more intuitive in sort of modern or contemporary discourse, we separated it out and we said, look, there's also taqwa and spirituality and a need for engaging in dhikrullah and connecting with your ultimate meaning and purpose. And there's a lot of sub-virtues that fall under that. And so when I want to think about the chief virtues, we're really trying to develop these 5, and we're trying to develop them in a moderated way, meaning that we want them to have what we call i'tidal. كَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We made you a moderate nation, so wasatiyah. Or خَيْرُ الْأُمُورِ أَوْسَطُهَا. The battery's out. Okay, it's a good thing we have a backup. But the volume is low on this one, I feel like. Yeah, inshallah. Yeah, so we want to develop these traits, these characteristics, and they're tempered, meaning it's i'tidal. The best of actions are those which are moderated. So this becomes a very important foundational principle in behavioral change and development, is that we want to develop these chief virtues, but develop the moderation of them. And we're going to talk about the sub-virtues as well, inshallah, as we go through this. So do you want to talk about this a little bit? Switch the slide. Or?
Okay, so before before we go into each of the sub-virtues, just bringing back a little bit of research into each of these characteristics. So for wisdom, we see in the research that greater wisdom is associated with greater levels of self-worth and self-esteem. A lot of our children these days, youth, teens especially, are suffering from just this idea of self-worth, having a very low level of self-esteem. I'm not good at anything, I suck at everything, I have no talents, I'm just bored of everything, that sort of idea of self-worth and self-esteem. Wisdom is also associated with several different personality traits in the literature. So we see maturity, open-mindedness, being flexible with things, social intelligence, sociability we talked about earlier as well, and the absence of neuroticism.
So that one's like very low. So we just switch with this one. Yeah.
Temperance, the research suggests that children who consistently exercise self-regulation, so self-regulation is when we as parents are kind of like, just kind of let them be intuitive and we don't tell them no, or you have to have these many bites of biryani or any other food, and they self-regulate. They realize that, okay, I have to like sleep by this time, I have to make this meal last all the way until next morning or breakfast, or I have to finish these leftovers later, maybe I should just eat dinner on time. I'm trying to teach my son this. It's working very slowly, but we're getting there, inshallah. So children who exercise self-control, and we're not always the mean guy or the bad guy telling them, you have to do this, you don't have to do this, they tend to be more productive and more successful as adults. For bravery that we talked about earlier as well, that findings show that people who are just more brave, and don't think of brave as just like Superman just coming in to like save the world, that kind of bravery, but just more like doing the right thing at the right time, speaking up for somebody who needs that help, stepping in when you need to step in with wisdom, of course. They also report higher levels of life satisfaction and well-being. And finally, of course, as Muslims, we know spirituality, no-brainer there. Even if the research findings were contradictory, we still have faith in our faith. That religion and spirituality enhances children's happiness and well-being, and it provides this level of social support. So especially if you are linking spirituality to the masjid, to an Islamic class, Islamic school, for example, just being with other Muslims, that social support is also built in within our spirituality.
Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are these sub-virtues, and this becomes actually important. This is a model that we've worked on at Little Center, and I've been a part of heading this research. And so what we've done is in the Islamic literature, they've developed kind of typologies or sub-virtues under these four I mentioned, and then we kind of separated out into five. Sub-virtues for adults they've come up with. But there's really nothing that we found that were specifically targeted for children. And so what we did was we took those, factors, those sub-virtues, and we combined some of them and we removed some of them in the interest of what would be developmentally appropriate for the children. Okay? And so these are the actual sub-virtues. And what I would advise, we're not going to go through each one and explain them all, but actually we have we have it right here. Yeah. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, and then actually 2 slides down. Yeah. Go down one more. Yeah. One more. Okay. So under each one, there is these traits, and what I'm actually going to advise you guys to do, and what we'll do is if we get your emails, we'll actually send you a scale. So there's actually a survey and questionnaire that you could fill out, and it does the score for you, okay, for your kid. So for example, on reason, right, you say, or intellect and discernment, here's some questions, like my child tends to consider the potential consequences and impact of his or her choices before he or she makes a decision, okay? Love of learning. My child always has their nose in a book, for example. There's questions that relate to all of these. Let's go to the next one, temperance. And then, modesty, self-regulation, discipline, generosity, okay? And I want us to pay attention to these particular sub-virtues because what Islamic scholars have done is they've gone through an exhaustive review of the Quran and Sunnah and the virtue literature and derived and taken out all of the virtues that exist for adults, and what we did was we just turned them as appropriate for children. So it'll give you kind of a fast way of running through a whole lot of literature to get really pointed and specific as to what are the ones that I really want to instill in my children, okay? So there's agreeableness, for example, compassion, courage, and we have a set of questions that we've developed. We're in the getting this scale sort of validated, and we're building actually the scale. So you're kind of going to get the publication of it, inshallah. But if we go back to, I want us to go back to slide 16. And now what we want to do is to say, look, these are the list of traits, right, that we went through. Now, how do we develop those traits? That's the question, right? Because it's like, okay, that's great. Now I'm convinced. Focusing on akhlaq and socio-emotional or social development of children and character development and virtue development is really important. In fact, it'll help them in this dunya and in the akhirah, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, the person who has good character has taken off with the best of this dunya and the akhirah. Why the dunya? Because again, the more better character you have, the better outcomes and results you have even in the world, okay? Now, how do we develop that? That's the question. It's like, I'm sold, that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill this out with my spouse, run through the survey and look at where my child is at, and it's going to tell you they're a little bit weaker in this area, a little bit stronger in this area, okay? And what we want to do is to get you to know what those are. Go to the next slide, please. And this is the 5 kind of model, right? Like 5-step model. This is actually derived from Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin with regard to character development and virtue development, okay? So what you're doing here, what he's laid out 5 major, actually it's 4, we added a 5th one, rather. Okay, so it's sort of 4 from Imam al-Ghazali, and we added a 5th one. And what he's saying is that there are these 4 or 5, in our case, central modalities of instilling positive change and character in children. And we're going to go through each of these with some specific examples, also drawing from the seerah as well. But I'll just run through the 5, and then we'll go through each one of them. The first is personal disposition, meaning you need to be able to separate between character and personality. Okay? So I have 3 children. My middle daughter, very introverted. Okay? The other day, we're visiting family here. I was at my father's house, and my father is speaking to his sister abroad and wants to show my daughter, right, to the FaceTime. And she's just like overwhelmed. She doesn't want to talk to anybody. She just, closes up and wants to run away. And whereas her younger sister, 8 years old, she's like, feature me. I want to talk to her. Right? So very different, right? 2 people, same family, very different personalities, okay? What does that have to do with character? Well, it's important to know what the personality dispositions of your children are, because they're stable generally. They don't change, okay? But character does. And they do influence one another. For example, somebody may be more neurotic. Somebody may be more anxiety prone. Somebody who's more anxiety prone may be more risk averse, okay? That may mean they may be a little bit more careful with money, for example, right? Or socialization, okay? They're a little bit neurotic, self-conscious. They may not be the type of person who who's hosting guests all the time, visiting extended family all the time. They may be the one that wants to kind of, keep to themselves. Now, Islam doesn't tell us that you have to change that personality, but what it does say is that you need to do enough of good character and know your personality in order to ensure you follow the sunnah or comply with that which is ethical, right? So you don't have to be like a super social butterfly, right? Go out there and hang around and make all sorts of friends, but you do have to keep connection with your family members. For example, you may want to host some people who may be in need, for example, or building certain relationships with individuals. Doesn't mean that you have to have a whole lot of this happening, but that's good character, right? Somebody who is very extroverted is somebody who may be going out all the time and wanting to party all the time, right? And go to like gatherings all the time, right? And they may need to temper that inclination to want to draw attention or to overspeak or to, not spend enough family time because they're so interested in doing a lot. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's a difference between character here. It's achievable for that person to do, but but we can't say to that person, stop being extroverted. Stop wanting to socialize. No, there are healthy ways of being able to do that, but it needs to be tempered within the confines of what is good character and what is desirable character. What is haya, for example? When is it appropriate to speak? When is it appropriate not to be loud? When is it appropriate to be silent? And vice versa. Maybe it's okay for you to do that at home, but then when you're out in public, you don't want to do that, even though you may have the instinct to do that, right? And a lot of this needs to be developed and trained in children, but it's very, very critical for parents to know what those personalities are and then to have their children to know what those personalities in them are and to help them develop good character in a way that doesn't deny their personality or their predispositions and inclinations. Now, the other one is ta'aleem, meaning actually just teaching, right? Meaning that there's virtues, this is virtues of thoughts, telling people what is right and wrong, what is haya, what is the right thing to do, what does generosity mean, what does sabr mean, how does that look, and what should you do? So that's just talking to your kids and telling them this is what you're supposed to be doing. The other is habituation, i'tiyad. Now they know what they're supposed to be doing, okay? But it needs to be disciplined into them, meaning it needs to be created as a habit within them. Okay, you need to pray, here's why you need to pray. But now to develop that within them such that it becomes automated after they've already learned how to pray. The next one is experiential teaching. Again, we're going to go into these with more examples and details, is to actually teach them through experience. Meaning that there's a lot of research and data that shows that a lot of people's identity development and their future behaviors are really tied to their early life experiences that are either traumatic, okay, or the opposite thereof, and that being very powerfully positive, right, and encouraging for them. And there are these, we have thousands of we have 1,000,001 incidents that occur in our lives that we have as memories. How many of them do we actually remember? Not more than, let's say, 5% of those events. Why is it that we remember that 5% of events and not the other 95% of events? Some of you will never remember this happened. Hopefully not. And some of you, it'll make a profound impact on you. Something will hit really close to home that will have a profound, deep connection with you, that then you will say that you'll remember it. And you'll remember certain aspects of this. Okay? And so for children, you can create traumatic responses. By the way, a survey finds 1/3 of Muslim youth who experience atheism or problems with religion often are tied to traumatic issues. right? Historical issues that they've experienced. They're not intellectual problems. They're really just psychological experiences that people have had in their history. So we want to make sure that we're developing those positive kind of experiences for children. And the fourth is musahaba, meaning that just sohba or imitation, social modeling, right? Not do as I say and not as I do, but rather, you know, as the Sahaba said, kunu mithlana, right? Be like us. It's a pretty bold statement to say, but they had the sohbah of the Prophet ﷺ. So they said, look, do what we're doing because we learned it from the Prophet ﷺ. This is the way that you do it. And it's a very natural process of imitation, and those people whom you see put into practice those things that you've learned cognitively, right? So those are the 5 major ways of being able to develop virtue, actually overall develop and change human behavior in general, be it for children or adults, but this here we're laying emphasis on children in particular. We've gone through this. Yeah. So can we go to slide 23?
Okay, so we're going to talk about personality traits. Dr. Hooman mentioned the first part of that model, that's sort of the fitri part, the predisposition that children are born with their certain personalities. And what we see many times, especially when moms would come for like counseling or parents would come for counseling, the children are already like hating their parents because the parents are trying to change them. And that's where the problem comes in. We're trying to change personality and not character. And it should be the other way around. So personality, at least according to my personality professor at university, it's like 90% it's not going to change. Like what you're born with, that's going to be your personality for the rest of your life. Character, as Dr. Hooman mentioned, can be built upon, it can be learned as well. So for personality, if you can't change it, just like, you know, if you can't, what's the phrase? If you can't beat them, join them. So just knowing personality is a way of getting to know your child. Can you go to the next slide, please? So one of the models of personality that is quite well researched and is used in the clinical setting as well, the acronym is called OCEAN. So just remember OCEAN, and I will go through each of the letters. The next slide, please, Jazakallah. Okay, so these are the big 5 personality traits. A couple of things before I go through each of them. This is like non-judgmental. So when you are going through each of them, you can think about your child, that's fine, or think about yourself, or your spouse, or your mother-in-law, like no judgment here. Think about whoever you want. And secondly, these are value-free. So you could be like 0 on openness to experience and like 85% on agreeableness, and that's fine. We are just born with that predisposition, no need to worry about it as long as it's not harming yourself or others. Okay, so the O in OCEAN is openness to experience, which is how imaginative are you, how open are you to learning new things, trying new foods, going to different places. So again, you can think about yourself, think about your circle of family and friends. Some people you may know are like, let's go try this sushi place and this coffee place and go here and there. They might be like 95% on the openness to experience part. And again, these are all percentages, so it's not just yes or no, you are between 0 to 100. Some people are like, nope, I'm just doing the same thing for dinner every single day. If you watch like these meal planning videos on YouTube, like there's some people who eat like grilled chicken and asparagus like every single day, and they're happy with that. So they're probably very low on openness to experience. The C in OCEAN is conscientiousness, so not consciousness, but conscientiousness, which is how reliable you are, how much of a neat freak you are, how structured and organized you are. I know me, like we've done this in our counseling classes, so I'm pretty high up on there, like as much to the annoyance of my husband, but I like agendas and planners and cleaning things. But if you're someone who doesn't mind a little bit of clutter and you're okay with some mess, you're probably lower on the conscientiousness factor. The E is for extroversion/introversion. I think this one gets talked about quite commonly. This is the more popular one. You see memes about this. You see like shows and episodes about, oh, he's so introverted or she's so extroverted. And it's essentially to do with energy. So if you are more extroverted, you like to be around people, you gain energy from being around people. If you're more introverted, you lose energy from being with people. So I look at it, so for example, you have a wedding to go to. you're at the wedding, you show up, you say salam to the people that you know. People you don't know, it's okay. You just go to the food table. And then when you come home, you need a nap. Like you are done for the day. So you're probably like a little bit higher on the introversion scale. Extroversion, they'll go to a wedding, they'll go to the after party, they'll go to like the other people's in-laws' house, they don't even know, they'll say hi to everyone. So that's probably a little bit higher on the E, the extroversion. The A in ocean is for agreeableness, so how friendly you are, how open you are to talking to people, to cooperating with people. So individuals who are low in agreeableness, they're like not shy to express their opinion. They might get into a little fight with you. They're okay with that. People who are very high in agreeableness, they'd rather just focus on teamwork and we're all winners and let's do this together. So they're those types of individuals. And I'm giving very extreme examples here. Most of us, I think, would be in the middle. We're hopefully a moderate nation. Then we have N in ocean, which is neuroticism. I know the word neurotic doesn't sound very appropriate, but this is in clinical terms. So neuroticism has to do with emotional stability. So if you're high in your emotional stability, you're like throughout the day, you're pretty like baseline, like nothing gets you too excited, but you don't get too down either. But if you are perhaps lower on emotional stability, perhaps you go through a lot of mood fluctuations throughout the day. So there's individuals like this. There's a good friend of mine that I know, she gets like really excited about the sun, about ice cream. Like just when these things happen, she gets so happy. And then when it's raining, she gets really down. So that's just who she is. So some people are like that. Some people are like, sun, rain, ice cream, no ice cream, I'm fine. So this is just some examples of how ocean looks like in real people. Okay, so in the next slide, we want you guys to talk to each other, inshallah. So with the person next to you, assess their personality. No, I'm just kidding, don't do that. That's very judgmental. Just assess yourself. So with ocean, I'll put that slide back up, inshallah, as well, just in a second. Just assess yourself, or maybe you can assess your child in a non-judgmental way. And then secondly, talk to each other about what you like most about your personality, and what are some things that you're hoping to change about your personality through character development. So I'll give you a couple of minutes for that, just so you can pair up and answer these two questions.
We'll probably skip past this one. We can cover this. Okay, we'll go here. I guess, right? Well, with the heading, but then go there.
Yes, yes.
So, and then what about the case? Do you want to do the other case too?
If there's time, we can
What do you think?
just to get them to think about those terms, like use those terms. Like,
These, right? This one?
That mean, yeah. If we have a couple of minutes. But your call.
We have half an hour. Do you think we can get through it all? So it took us like halfway. We're halfway, and it's about an hour in. So I would probably say like skip the case so that we can just get through it. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah, just skip. And I might see some of my own slides.
Okay. So we'll go to here. Inshallah. Well, sorry, here. And then jump to this one, inshallah. Good.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the discussion again. Sorry, I know it sounds really interesting and engaging. And I'll ask one person from each side to just share one thing that you guys talked about, anything about the ocean, personality, scale, anything you discussed. So the brothers first. So just one thing that if anyone would like to share about what you talked about. Yes. Would you like to go ahead? Yes.
I think for the first one,
Yeah.
they don't have a choice except try anything new because the devices
Right.
right here. So I don't think they even use their brain. They just
Right.
go for it.
Just go for it. That's a good example when the brothers is mentioning that for openness to experience, especially nowadays with our devices, sometimes there is no choice for openness to experience. All these experiences are just coming at you and you're just one click away. And it could be a negative, positive experience. So that's an interesting, I hadn't thought about that perspective of technology and personality, how that's interacting. Jazakallah khair for sharing that. One of the sisters, please, anything about ocean, about your own personality that you're like, oh my God, why am I like this? Anything at all. You just enjoy talking to each other. So you're probably like really high on the extroversion. Why are we clean freaks? Now we know, right? Yes, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. Okay, so we'll move on to the first virtue in the model that we were discussing, the role of teaching and ta'aleem in developing good character.
Yeah, so we're going through each of the modalities of changing character development. So let's jump to 29. So one of the things that we want to do potentially for children, this is basically teaching, right? Teaching them what is right and what is wrong, and teaching about the virtues. And I think one of the most profound ways of doing this for children is through storytelling, okay? And to have a bi-directional conversation that elicits feedback, right? Because children, when you lecture children, half the time they're not listening, right? Especially if you're lecturing them after they did something wrong. So you spend, if you like hearing yourself talk, then go ahead, that's fine. But oftentimes children are done after the first, minute or so. And so children don't have the capacity, especially now with all the social media too, to actually sit there and listen to an entire lecture that you have to provide. So if you want to teach them something, you want to teach them proactively, and you also want to teach them not reactively. What I mean by that is that not just after they did something wrong, that you just scold them about it, but rather before you do something, or before an event occurs, or while an event is about to occur, is an opportunity to tell them about how to relate and how to inculcate that. So I'll take an example from the Prophet ﷺ. So somebody comes to the Prophet ﷺ and asks him, and he says, can you give me permission to commit adultery? Okay? And the people around him, they had the reaction like many of us would be like, quiet, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? What kind of question is this? Coming to the Prophet of Allah and you're asking for permission to commit fornication. So the Prophet ﷺ, interestingly, doesn't turn around and say to him, that's wrong. What are you thinking? Don't you know that Allah's command is already there? Like, la taqrabu zina. Okay? So what does he say instead? This is where he's inviting dialogue for him to use his own rationality and his reason. And he asks him and he says, come here. So first of all, he's drawing him closer rather than making him go further away. So he's not like, what's the matter with you? Distancing him, bringing him closer. And then he says to him, would you like for somebody to do that with your mother? And he says, no. Of course not, right? And then, so he says, neither would people like it for their own mothers, right? Would you like that for your own daughter? And the person says, no, absolutely not. Then would you like it for your sister? No, absolutely not. And after going through this process of having him relate several examples, of individuals and women folk in his family, he says that the Prophet ﷺ said that neither would people like it for their ends. Then the Prophet ﷺ placed his hand on him and he said, "O Allah, forgive his sins, purify his heart, and guard his chastity." Okay, so it makes a dua for him. It's very important, the aspect of dua. But he allows him to understand the rationale for why this is an unreasonable request to begin with. Is this the way that you would like yourself or your family members to be treated? And so this is an opportunity of ta'aleem with the child, an opportunity to sit and discuss and teach the child. I remember when I was, my son was about nine or so. He lived in, we were living in Chicago. And so we had these neighbors that were Christian neighbors. And he used to play with these two kids, okay? They're brothers. And he came to me and he said, I have a question for you, but I'm not sure that it's an appropriate question to ask. And I feel like if I ask you the question, you'll get mad, so I'm not going to ask you the question. Obviously, he wants me to ask him what it's about, right? So I say, no, it's okay. The way to understanding is through good questions. And so he says, how do I know that Islam is true? Because so-and-so, Cameron and Evan, their parents are Christian, and they believe in Jesus Christ. And that's what their parents told them. And you're Muslim, and Mom is Muslim, so you're telling me Islam is correct. And so how do I know that we're just not doing whatever our parents are saying, and which one is actually the real truth? And it's a good question. And he's like, oh, you're not mad? I said, no, I'm not mad. Actually, very good question, very good observation. So I sit down, we have a conversation, and we talk about, well, let's try to understand the nature and existence of creation, right? Everybody's created. So let's just go with some basic ideas. If there's a creation, there must be something that created all this. Your toys, were they created on their own? No, we went to the store, somebody made it, and therefore, so we're going through this process. And so we say, is it reasonable to consider that a created being created himself at the same time? Does that seem to make sense? And he's like, no, that doesn't really make sense. There needs to be a creator for the creation, so you can't really be creator and creation at the same time. You can't really create yourself. And I was like, so we go through this conversation, and then, then he goes, let me ask you a question. He says, so I'm convinced, first of all, but he goes, if I was to believe that, if somebody just perchance were to believe that, Jesus Christ is actually Allah, then what would happen to them? Well, I'd say, they'd go to Jahannam, they wouldn't be saved. They'd be in trouble in the Akhirah because you're ascribing something to Allah which is not His, right? So he goes, okay, got it. So next day, he goes to play with the kids, and he goes to Cameron and Evan, and they, usually, I don't know, somehow the conversation came up, and perhaps he brought it up. And he says, I don't know about this Jesus Christ being God thing. And then they're like, no, we believe that He's God. And he's like, no, He can't be God. Because if Jesus Christ is God, then who created Jesus Christ? Because He's a person. And they're like, He did. It's like, does that make sense that He created Himself, but that He's also God at the same time? And they were like, no, it doesn't really make sense. And he's like, what happens if we believe this? They're asking my son, says, well, you're going to go to hell. And he's like, I don't want to go to hell. So he said, so what should I do? You should believe that there's only one God, and that's Allah. He says, okay, I believe in your religion. And then the kid, his younger brother, looks at him and he's like, you believe in his religion? He's like, I don't want to go to hell alone. So he says, okay, I'm going to become Muslim too. Later on, they go to their house, and he's like, okay, we know Yusuf doesn't eat ham sandwiches, so we have his veggie sandwich available. And the kids go, Mom, we're not eating ham sandwiches anymore either. He's like, what? We follow the religion of Yusuf. We don't do this ham sandwich stuff. I don't know about this Jesus Christ being God thing. Thankfully, she was like, she just kind of thought it was cute humor with kids. Alhamdulillah, so it wasn't any problem. And the idea is, I'm sharing this kind of personal story, just the idea of having this conversation with children, right? About what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, and why. And being able to instill that and develop that within the children. And then, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So just really quickly, with ta'aleem, with conversation, if you are having this sort of discussion, especially about more like sensitive matters, about religion, about your neighbors' kids, and if you don't want to cause too much trouble, being attuned to your child's personality, so going back to that again as well, and just creating a safe space. So I think many times we will have a conversation with our kids. That conversation is like so intense, like, tell me what you're feeling, tell me what you're thinking. Nothing, Mom, relax. No, tell me what you're thinking. Like, it just, we get so intense that it's not a safe and warm space. So making sure the conversation is happening at an appropriate time, appropriate place, with that safe space and warmth as well. So that children can also come up to you, not just with like some really good questions, but also if they make a mistake, if something has happened at school, that they can come up to you as the first person, and they know that you're not going to be totally shocked and just like resort to like very desi parenting styles, and you will inshallah follow some of these tactics as well. And finally, it's important to elicit feedback from kids. I'm still working on this with my son. I need a lot of work with this, that many times we do go into lecture mode, as Dr. Hooman mentioned. So eliciting feedback might be something like, hey, I saw you breaking your neighbor's Lego. So instead of just lecturing them about breaking stuff, it could be like, how does that make you feel? Or how do you think it made him feel? And letting them talk as well. So that's just a very simple example of eliciting feedback during a conversation.
Actually, I'll just jump ahead of it. I think we can just go into resistance training, honestly. Okay, can we go to slide 37? So the first one we talked about was ta'aleem, teaching. Second one is habituation. So developing habits in children, right? Pushing them into developing habits. And Kashmala is going to talk about resistance training. So that'll be on slide 40. So basically the idea here in general, if you think about going to the gym, right? Well, the Prophet ﷺ said, خُذُوا مِنَ الْأَعْمَالِ مَا تُطِيقُونَ. Do that action in which you have the capacity for. And Ali radiallahu anhu said, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أُكَلِّمَ النَّاسَ عَلَى قَدْرِ عُقُولِهِمْ. That I have been commanded to speak to people in accordance with their intellects. So it's important for you to understand your child's developmental space and place where they are in order to construct a resistance training regimen, okay? What do we mean by resistance training? Kind of like if you go to the gym. In the beginning, you can't, you go to the gym and if you try to pick up like, I don't know, for the brothers who's first time who's sitting on a bench press, you're not going to put like 2-3 plates on it. You're going to kill yourself, right? It's not going to work. And so, but you also don't want to just delude yourself to going into the gym and just picking up, like a plastic bar and doing 20 of those and you think that you're going to get, you're doing something. But rather, you need to put enough resistance that you feel the pain, but not so much that it's impossible for you to actually achieve. And progressively what happens is that it gets stronger and stronger, right? The nafs is like a muscle, okay? It actually gets exhausted. So for example, there is a study of the radishes and the cookies study. So they brought 2 groups of individuals, right? into a room where they had on one table radishes, on the other table they had cookies. So they said to the one group, go ahead and eat the cookies, no problem. Then they took the other group and they said, you can't eat the cookies, you have to eat the radishes. But you can smell the cookies, you just can't eat them. Okay? What ends up happening? Then they follow up and they give both groups a problem-solving activity. It's a trick. The problem is actually unsolvable. It's an impossible problem to solve. They find that the people who ate the cookies end up spending about 18 minutes trying to solve the problem. Those that ate the radishes end up quitting after 9 minutes. Okay? What's the idea here? That those who ate the radishes, they had to control their impulses from eating the cookies. So they had to use that muscle of impulse control. Now you told them to do another exercise that's hard. They quit easier and faster because they feel exhausted. Their resources of impulse control and self-control has become depleted. Okay? And obviously, the more and more you exercise resistance training, the more and more capacity you're going to end up being to have. But it's very important to consider that it's like a muscle. It's finite. So you don't want to do too much more than you can actually handle. So don't throw so much on your child that they can't handle it. But at the same time, you want to give enough pressure for that growth to occur. So that when you go back to the gym and you put new weights on it, you know, you're able to lift a little bit more each time progressively. Do you want to?
In terms of resistance training, just a few practical ways of doing it. So I'm sure many of us have heard of reward, punishment, that model of just reinforcement and then taking away something as a negative or a natural negative consequence. So in terms of resistance, you want to have a balance between the two. I think sometimes, I know for me especially, like when studying developmental psychology and counseling, I kind of went like the other way. So I'm like very like positive parenting and no time outs and only time ins and let's talk about everything. And my husband would be like, okay, you gotta like rein that back in a little bit. And sometimes there has to be some punishment. I think the word punishment comes off as a little bit harsh, but think of it as negative consequences. And natural negative consequences are the easiest ones to give. There's too much screen time happening, you can take away the iPad or Netflix or whatever, wherever your child is watching that. That's just something easy to do. If they're having a temper tantrum, if they're younger, take them away from that stimulated setting, take them away from that room, just a natural negative consequence. In terms of positive reinforcement to help with resistance training is to stay away from labeling. So let's just say your child has lied about something, like how that something in the house just went missing or broke. So instead of saying that you are a liar, you can say that I did not like your behavior I did not like the way that you lied. Like, you're still a good person, I still love you, but your lying behavior was not correct. So we don't call them a liar, but focusing on the behavior, not the trait. The other way of increasing resistance in children is acting out the opposite, whatever that they're opposing. So again, taking lying as an example, there's different ways that you can show them that you are trustworthy, that they are trustworthy. It could be through storytelling, as Dr. Hooman mentioned, through play-based instruction as well. I found working with kids here and there, just with my own children and just our nephews and nieces, that many times through play, especially for younger kids, they just pick up on a lot more. So while you're making a puzzle, building Lego, playing video games, the conversations just start where you can focus on two different things and you can talk about some of these behaviors. They might not respond at that time, but something just might click through that play-based instruction. And finally, setting consistent household norms. So that could be like house chores. We have house chores like in the morning before homeschooling, but that also has like a very fine balance. That am I going to make my son like unload the dishwasher, do one load of laundry, clean one bathroom, and then we start homeschooling, and then he gets screen time? He will be like burnt out, right? Because of resistance, looking at it as a muscle. So that balance, every child is different, so you have to see how much you can push them and then where you need to kind of step back a little bit. With just one last thing with introversion, extroversion in children, here's what I'm hearing just anecdotally from family and friends, that a lot of our kids, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, their social competence is sort of lacking these days. So sometimes as parents, we don't want to push them. We have like an Eid party at our house. One of our kids is like super shy, and we say, you know what, it's okay, you stay in your room, you don't have to come down, because we don't want to like upset them. So that might be like really low resistance, that might not serve the child best, but you don't want to go the other way and be like, hey, you got to come down and hug every single of your relatives, sit down, talk to them, eat dinner with all of them, talk to all the older uncles and the older aunties, play with their cousins, and then you can go upstairs. Maybe a middle balance would be nice. So for my son, for example, I said, you have to come down and say salam to everyone. You can shake hands if you're comfortable. Hugging is always optional. And when they're leaving at the door, you have to be there to say salam as part of honoring the guests. And then you can go on the bouncy castle and go jump with your cousins. I thought that was a pretty well-balanced thing. I should elicit feedback from him and ask him what he thought of our Eid party plans. So just some examples of too low a resistance level and then too high of resistance.
Go to 42. So just a couple of quick pointers that I think is important. I talked about the first one in terms of development gradually, right? أحب الأعمال إلى الله أدومه وإن قل. The Prophet ﷺ said that the most beloved actions to Allah are those that are done consistently, yet even if they be little. Consistency and gradual is really key, both for developing behavior but also extinguishing behavior. So a couple of really golden rules I would probably want you to take away from this is that if you say you are going to do something for a child, be it a reward for a good behavior or be it a punishment for a behavior that they have done, you better make sure you execute. So here's the problem. Oftentimes parents think, oh, I was a little harsh and I became emotional and angry, and then I told them that you can't have dessert later on. You're not going to have ice cream when you go out. And then you change your mind and you feel, oh, I feel a little bad. I shouldn't have done that. That's, that's terrible. That's terrible for developing the child's behavior. Why? Because children start to develop the notion of what is right and wrong, not based upon what's objective, but based upon your mood. Okay? So they don't see change as originating in themselves, they see it in the parent. So the parent, some days if I don't jump on the couch, some days if I hit my sister, some days if I don't eat my food, I'll get dessert, some days I won't. Okay? It really depends on the mood, possibly, or how much I cry, or how much of a fuss I make. So you have to be very deliberate and consistent in what you do. You have to say, if you're not going to have ice cream, you're absolutely not going to be having ice cream. It doesn't matter what happens. If you say it, you better be willing and ready to actually execute it. Because so be deliberate in what you're going to say, because it's important for them to have consistency in hearing from you what they should do. Secondly, but in addition to consistency, they should know what they can or cannot do. Don't keep changing it up, right? Can they engage in this particular behavior, or can they not engage in this behavior? And if they cannot, and there's a punishment associated with it, then that punishment is administered every single time. Okay? Every single time. The moment that you not administer the punishment is the moment that they believe that it's not actually related to that particular behavior, but it relates to you. Okay? So it's very, very critical that you do that. In order to extinguish a behavior, you have to deal with the crying tantrums. Okay, let's say, you know what, this is news to me. I never knew this before. But you know what? We've been going to the store. My child cries. Sometimes I'm able to hold out. Sometimes I'm not, and I give them what they want. The child subconsciously learns this. So basically, you go to the store. They say, I want this. And you say, no. They cry or make a fuss for 5 minutes. And then you give them what they want. What you've taught them is that it takes 5 minutes of crying to get what I want. Okay. Let's say you go to the store and you say, that's it. And you hold out for 7 minutes. Then you give them what they want. They learn that it's 7 minutes. Okay? Let's say you go to the store and you hold out the whole 15 minutes they cry, which is good. But then the next time you go, after 5 minutes you give in, you actually strengthen it. They believe that if I cry enough, then I'm going to get it at some point because it's randomized. So I may as well try crying. Okay? Now children don't do this in a planned way, obviously, right? They're not sitting there thinking, oh, I have a clock in my mind. It's just learned subconsciously. So that's why what you want to do is you want to give it and you want to be emotionally detached from it. So think of it, I often call it like the policeman type of violation or administration of punishment. What you do is you go to them and you say, look, I understand that you feel really bad about what you did. That's fine. And I really don't want to do this to you. But unfortunately, you can't have this. And it pains me to do so, but it's not going to happen. You know what you did, and it really has to do with your behavior. If you didn't do that, then it wouldn't happen. All right? I'm obliged to give you this punishment, right? Similar to like if you get a traffic ticket, the police officer says, I kind of feel bad for you, but you're going 100 kilometers on a 50. I don't know. I mean, I kind of have to give you this. And so they're emotionally detached. It's not that, oh, I'm so upset that you did this. How dare you? Or how? No, it's based upon you know what's right, you know what's wrong, and you didn't do it. Okay? So, how do you want to do this?
You could do adhan to finish.
Yeah, and then we'll just wrap up. After the adhan, we'll wrap up in about 5 minutes, inshallah. Maybe like these two.
Okay, so we're going to really quickly just get through the last few slides, inshallah, and then we will be here after Maghrib Salah for Q&A, and then you can also give us your email addresses if you wanted that scale of virtues, inshallah. This was, I believe, the fourth way of...
Maghrib happens right away, doesn't it?
Like 3 minutes?
Yeah? Okay.
Should we continue? Should we do after Maghrib Salah?
I would say let's wrap up after Maghrib because it happens fast.
Yes, okay. So we'll wrap up after Maghrib. We'll go for Salah first, and then we will come back and inshallah.
Inshallah.
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا وقال إنني من المسلمين. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم. وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم. وإما ينزغنك من الشيطان نزغ فاستعذ بالله إنه هو السميع العليم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. اللهم أنت السلام وأنت السلام تبارك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم إنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك ربنا